Some men spend years regretting that they stayed. Others carry the quiet, aching weight of walking away. But the strange part? Most don't realize which one they are until long after the decision's been made. You think you're doing the right thing, staying to keep the family together, or leaving to save yourself. But once the dust settles, once the lawyers are gone and the house is either too full or too empty, something unexpected creeps in: doubt. Because no matter which side you're on, there's a version of regret waiting. The kind that doesn't yell or announce itself. It just whispers late at night when you're sitting alone, wondering how you got here. And the truth is, there's no clean answer. Some men regret leaving. Others regret staying. But very few walk away untouched. This isn't about who is right or wrong. It's about what comes after. The realizations, the blind spots, the quiet truths that hit you when no one's watching. In this video, we're going to break down the real reasons some men carry regret, whether they walked out or stayed too long. And by the end, you might see your own story in a way you never have before. Some men leave because they're desperate for freedom. They imagine peace, space, control. No more arguments, no more walking on eggshells. At first, it feels like relief. The apartment is quiet. The air is still. There's no one to fight with, no one to please. But over time, that silence gets heavy. Freedom turns into emptiness. Days feel longer. Meals feel colder. There's no shared laughter, no casual chatter, no one waiting when you walk through the door. You're technically free, but it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like floating with no anchor, like winning a game that suddenly doesn't matter anymore. On the other side, some men stay for the same reason: comfort. They stay because they're afraid of starting over, afraid of rocking the boat, afraid of being alone. So they settle into routine. They tell themselves things aren't that bad, that this is just how long-term relationships work. But slowly something shifts. The connection fades. The days blur together. Resentment builds in silence, and love turns into obligation. Years pass, and one day, they look in the mirror and realize they stopped growing a long time ago. In both cases, what they thought they were choosing, freedom or safety, turned into something else entirely. But that was only the beginning of the surprises ahead. Leaving means walking away from more than just a person. It means leaving behind years of shared memories, inside jokes, and small routines that once made up the rhythm of your life. At first, it's easy to focus on the pain, the fights, the reasons you had to get out. But once you're gone, the good memories come back like echoes. The way they laughed at your worst jokes. The weird traditions you created together. Even the silence you used to share while watching the same shows on the couch. No new relationship can recreate that kind of history. And for some men, that realization hits harder than expected. They didn't just lose someone. They lost part of themselves that only existed in that shared past. But staying for the past can be just as painful. Many men stay because they're chasing what was. They remember how things used to be, before the tension, before the disconnect, before life got so heavy. They think if they hold on long enough, maybe those good days will come back. But nostalgia is tricky. It can blind you to how far things have actually drifted. You find yourself waiting for a version of the relationship that doesn't exist anymore. And while you're waiting, time slips by. Years go by in a fog of maybe. And when you finally wake up, the only thing left is the regret that you didn't move sooner. Because while the past can bring comfort, it can also be a trap. And sometimes the hardest thing to accept is that what once felt permanent was already gone. For the men who left, the hardest part wasn't the breakup. It was the silence that followed. In the beginning, being alone feels like a break. No one asking where you're going. No one to explain yourself to. Just peace. But then one night, you come home, and it's too quiet. You heat up dinner, eat it alone, and there's no conversation to fill the room. No one laughs at your dumb story from work. No one's there to turn off the lights when you fall asleep on the couch. The solitude you craved starts to feel like a punishment. And before you know it, loneliness becomes part of your routine. But for some men who stayed, loneliness never left. It just looked different. They were still in the house, still technically together, but everything felt distant. Conversations became logistics. Touch became rare. Eye contact faded. They sat at the same dinner table, but it felt like two strangers eating in silence. And that kind of loneliness, being alone while lying next to someone, is its own kind of heartbreak. You feel unseen, unheard, untouched, and sometimes that emptiness hurts more than being alone ever could. Either way, the illusion breaks. Being with someone doesn't guarantee connection, and being alone doesn't guarantee peace. What you miss most often isn't the person, it's being understood. For the men who left, the reality of rebuilding hits fast and hits hard. Suddenly, you're not just starting over emotionally, you're starting over with everything. New place, new bills, new routines. The bed feels empty. The fridge is bare. You have to learn how to cook again, clean everything yourself, remember birthdays without a reminder. And then there's the money. Legal fees, rent, child support, alimony. Costs stack up quickly, and the financial cushion you once had starts to vanish. No one tells you how much of your mental energy will go into surviving, not just healing. You want a fresh start, but you didn't expect it to feel like starting from nothing. And for those who stayed, the cost looked different, but it was just as high. You didn't lose your house, but you might have lost your voice. The more you tried to keep the peace, the more of yourself you gave up. You stopped speaking up. You stopped dreaming bigger. You let the weight of the relationship press down until you were just going through the motions. Every day became a quiet negotiation with yourself. Is this just what life is now? You kept the life, but you lost the spark. And after years of swallowing your own needs, you look up one day and realize you barely recognize the person you've become. So whether you walked away or stayed, the cost was real. And what came next? For many men, it was the part that hurt the most. For the men who left, the impact on their children was the heaviest weight of all. They didn't expect how hard it would be to miss birthdays, school plays, or just the everyday noise of Full House. At first, they told themselves they'd still be present, still be involved. And maybe they were. But something always felt off. The bond changes when you're no longer under the same roof. Holidays feel fractured. Phone calls feel forced. And no matter how hard you try, there's a quiet voice inside that asks, did I let them down? Even if it was the right decision for your own sanity, the guilt doesn't care. It lingers, especially when you see them hurting and realize you can't fix it with a weekend visit. But for the men who stayed, thinking it was for the kids, the regret hits differently. You convince yourself they were better off with both parents under one roof. You thought you were protecting them. But kids notice more than we admit. They feel the tension in the walls, the silence at the dinner table, the cold glances between parents who no longer touch. And later, when they're older, some of them ask the question you weren't ready for. Why didn't you just leave? That's when it hits you. Maybe staying wasn't the shield you thought it was. Maybe all you taught them was how to survive in a house without love. In both cases, the regret doesn't come from a lack of love. It comes from the fear that love, in the end, still wasn't enough to protect them. For the men who left, the question that haunts them is simple. Did I give up too soon? In the heat of conflict, walking away feels like the only choice. You tell yourself you tried, that nothing would have changed. But later, sometimes years later, a quiet doubt creeps in. Maybe there was one more conversation to be had, one more therapy session, one more moment of humility that could have opened a door. You start to wonder if the relationship was broken or if you were just exhausted. And that's when regret slips in, not because leaving was wrong, but because you'll never know what might have happened if you'd fought just a little harder. But for the men who stayed, the regret cuts in the opposite direction. They did fight for years, maybe decades. They compromised, sacrificed, tried everything to fix something that had already flatlined. And now they look back and realize how much of themselves they gave away chasing something that never came back to life. They stayed loyal to a ghost. They stayed because they thought effort would eventually bring love back. But all it brought was time they can't get back. Whether you left too early or stayed too long, the pain is the same. You wonder if you misread the moment. And sometimes the hardest thing to accept is that there was never a clear answer, just a choice you had to live with either way. Regret doesn't care which path you took. It shows up either way. Some men carry the weight of walking out always wondering what could have been saved. Others carry the weight of staying, mourning the years they spent trying to fix something that was already gone. And the truth is, there's no clean, easy answer. Love is messy. Marriage is complicated. And when it breaks, it never leaves anyone completely whole. But here's what separates the ones who move forward from the ones who stay stuck: the ability to face the truth without running from it, to admit what hurt, what failed, and what they could have done differently without drowning in guilt or blame. Because the point isn't to avoid pain. It's to make sure the pain meant something. If you're in the middle of deciding whether to leave or stay, don't rush it. Don't numb it. Sit with it. Ask yourself what you're really afraid of. Is it being alone, or is it being honest? Because regret is loudest when you lie to yourself. At the end of the day, no man avoids the cost. But the ones who grow are the ones who stop pretending there's a perfect choice and start building a better life with the one they made.